9. The Whitewood House. Frost in the fire and the rocking chair, frost in the hearth, frost in the ladle, children's voices in the air, wind that rocks the empty cradle. Mid-Gallifreyan Nursery Versary. I don't want you out wandering the corridors, Alice, not after candle-dark. Innocent had gathered up the fallen cards. She packed them into a drawer and locked it. Alice, who never ever made an attempt to help, watched her from an armchair. He pulled a face. "Because the house is disturbed. Is that why the clock chimed?" "Impossible. The clock died centuries ago." "I thought you knew everything. Was it another omen?" She could tell he was baiting her. "RQ won't come now," she said pointedly. Jobiska, who had supposedly been snoozing in the corner of her chair, opened an eye and said, "Alice bet RQ that he knew where the will was hidden." "Again?" said Innocent. Alice pointed angrily at Jobiska. "That old stoke has been saving that up all the time." Jobiska shrank further into her chair. She began dabbing at her eyes with a grey flannel. "I don't go out any more, dear. No one takes me out any more. If you took me out, I wouldn't overhear so much." "Alice," said Innocent, "do you never get tired of these games? Because the rest of us do." Alice grinned. "RQ never learns. Anyway, what else is there to do?" She shook her head. "I blame Cousin Glospin." "Good," he said. "And where did you tell RQ the will was hidden this time?" "I only suggested it. I didn't think anyone had looked there before." "Everyone has looked everywhere," she intoned. "Where did you say?" Alice shrugged. "Not telling." Innocent looked at Jobiska. "In the clock, dear," said the old lady. "That's what he told him." There was a footstep outside. By the time the door opened, the 3 occupants of the room were seated round the empty fire mantel, enjoying a quiet moment of contemplation in each other's company. The drudge stalked into the room as if it was searching for an illicit and forbidden party. None of the cousins looked up. The huge servant surveyed them for a moment. It placed the bowl of Feathergill gruel that it was carrying on the table. "Early tonight," observed Innocent to Alice over her darning. She stitched at a tear in the patched robe she was wearing. She regarded the drudge with the contempt it deserved. "My cousins are staying here until the disturbances have stopped." The drudge moved to the mirror. It carefully pulled away the shawl that had been draped over the glass. Fixing Innocent with its implacable stare, it lifted up the garment and ripped it slowly and deliberately in half. Innocent ignored the warning and got on with her needlework. The chest of drawers gave a click. One of the drawers had unlocked itself. It slid open and disgorged the pack of cards in a small fountain. "Traitor!" muttered Innocent. The cousins watched in silence as the drudge picked the scattered cards off the floor. It pulled open a drawer in its own wooden bodice and dropped the pack inside. Giving them a varnished glare of triumph, it stalked out of the room. The door closed itself. "Suppose it tells Sathralope," whispered Alice, eyeing the naked mirror nervously. Innocent refused to let her face betray any emotion. "Those were my best cards," she said. "My last drat pack." She picked at the stitch she had just made. "They were checking on us," said Alice. Innocent nodded. "That's why they brought the rations early. But if Sathralope is awake, then she'll already know." Since the housekeeper had not left her chair for 71 years, and had not been out of her room since the West Annex was infested by gullet grubs 112 years ago, the likelihood of being watched seemed negligible. Innocent climbed up on the dressing table and arranged the 2 halves of shawl over the mirror as best she could. They must realize something's happening, she said. Alice peered into the pot of gruel. At least they haven't withdrawn rations. Not yet. Innocent pointed a thimbled finger at him. You are going to find out what's happened to Arcu. What? Blustered Alice. Out there, after candle dark? But you said, what about supper? The best part of receiving is the anticipation, said Innocent. You're 675, and it's time you took some responsibility. But... He stared longingly at the gruel pot. She took up her needle again. Especially since this is all your fault. The kitchen was an empty cavern near the top of the house. Chris had come down the dark attic stairs, drawn by the light from two pale lamps which hung by a rank of stone ovens. It had once been the ogre's kitchen from his dream, but the days when it must have cooked on a grand scale were clearly long gone. Web clung across the stacks of pans and skillets. A row of rusty spikes and gambrels dangled over a long-neglected grate, where Chris reckoned that animals had either once been slaughtered or roasted whole. Even so, he could smell something cooking. At the far end of the kitchen, there was evidence that the place was still in use. Clusters of dried fungi hung on strings from the ceiling branch beams. To his disgust, Chris noticed that one cluster was made up of little brown-furred rodents that were strung together by their tails. On a stove, a pot large enough to be a cauldron sat over a low flame. A sort of greasy grey stew steamed and glopped in the pot as if it was alive. It smelt rank, but it proved that the house was still occupied. On a work surface, a bowl was piled with a different sort of mushroom, all pale and chalky. They stank too. As Chris walked across the centre of the kitchen, a row of ladles hanging from a beam began to jangle like an alarm. He ducked into the nearest doorway and nearly fell down some more giant steps. The ladles shut up as soon as he was clear. He pressed cautiously on down the stairs. The white tree trunks were everywhere, lining the passages and reaching into arches between which the solid walls ran. Occasionally, there were glimmering lamps which filled the paths of the house with a ghostly glow. As he neared the foot of the stairs, Chris heard a distant whistle. 2 notes. Wee-woo, like that. He slowed his pace and edged forward. Wee-woo. He was looking along the length of the gallery. One side was open like a cloistered balcony that overlooked something dark and cavernous. Chris guessed it was the hall. The doctor was standing in an archway halfway along the gallery, staring down over the balustrade into the gloom. Wee-woo. He was whistling into the dark. Over and over, he repeated the same 2 notes. Chris took a step nearer, and the floorboard creaked under him. The doctor tensed and looked up. Chris pulled himself back. Rather than be caught, he headed back up the stairs to the kitchen. He needed to get a handle on the place before the doctor began imposing all the hyperactive catalytic effects that the doctor always imposed on every situation he walked into. He was moving cautiously across the kitchen for fear of setting off the ladles again when he heard footsteps. He ducked down some steps into a recess with a heavily barred door. It was cool here, but there was also a smell like rancid cheese. 2 thick metal struts had been slotted across the entrance. Chris pressed himself flat against the door for cover. The surface was surprisingly cold to his touch. His breath was turning to steam against it. Something scrabbled on the other side of the door. There was a thump as the something hit itself against the barrier. The cheese stench got stronger. Chris pulled up the cover on a spy hole in the door. There was a hiss in the dark on the other side. A grey-veined eyeball with an oblique black slit suddenly stared back out of the hole at him. Chris flinched. He heard movement in the kitchen. There was nowhere else to hide. He felt the door strain against its bars as the something inside pushed outward. Inches from him, the eyeball was starting to squirm out through the spy hole. It swiveled in its new socket to stare, unblinking at him. A hand slammed the cover down on the eye. There was a hissing squeal of rage, and the pressure on the door relented. The doctor wiped his hand on his trousers and studied Chris. His expression gave nothing away. "What was that?" Chris choked. "How should I know?" he said smoothly. "Something way past its sell-by date from the smell of it." "Sorry," said Chris. "Never mind." The doctor glanced back into the kitchen. "You just saw something nasty in the pantry, that's all." Chris shuddered involuntarily. "I think it saw me, too." He held out the doctor's jumper. "I brought you this." The doctor took the garment, wiped his hands on it like a towel, and deposited it on a workbench. "We have to find the TARDIS. It fell through the floor." "I guessed that," said Chris. "How far down did it go?" "Too far." There was a slurping noise from the main part of the kitchen. The doctor looked round nervously. "Just the stew," he said. Chris pushed past him out of the recess. "We'd better go and find the TARDIS, then. This kitchen gives me the creeps." "Fee, fi, fo, fum," said the doctor. He lingered by the doorway. "Do you know this place or something?" said Chris. The doctor shook his head. "Not at all." "Or what planet we're on?" "Haven't a clue. The TARDIS must have drifted off course." "I thought you said someone had tampered with the time vector generation unit." "Ah, you remember that." The doctor assumed a none too convincing air of bonhomie. He slapped Chris on the back in a careless sort of way. "Why don't you just pop down into the house and have a scout round?" "Just me?" "Yes. It seems like a big place and there's something I have to sort out. Just a quick look, Chris, to see if you can find the TARDIS." "Suppose I run into somebody?" "Big adjudicator like you," said the doctor. "It's dark. Stay out of sight." "Okay," said Chris. "And if I do get spotted, at least they won't recognize me." Anger suddenly flamed in the doctor's eyes. "Why?" he snapped. "Who have you been talking to?" "No one," said Chris. Ouch, he thought. Hit a raw nerve there. Cousin Arcu clung to the side of the loom. The two dim tallow lamps that stood by the carved stone bier did nothing to dispel the shadows of the great hall. Arcu shivered. He had crawled the length of the hall from where he had fallen from the clock. The toxins in the dust must have relaxed him, because, apart from a few bruises, he was unhurt. The only scars were inside, the twin hurts of misery and despair. To lie so close to the life-giving energies of the house's heart should be comforting, but the stone apron was cold and unresponsive. Barren, he thought. In his mind, like echoes, he heard the whispering voices of long-lost cousins calling him to join them. Why did he wait there? Why be alone? The echoing voices were hands that reached out to him. He longed to succumb to their embrace and be led by them into the darkness. That darkness where he no longer had to see anything. But he could not cast off what he had witnessed. He pulled himself up the side of the loom plinth and wiped at the dusty glass coffin that lay on the top. The figure that lay inside was serene and calm. A tribute of fresh flowers lay on Quince's ancient chest. Flowers still fresh after 6 3/4 centuries. There were no signs of the stab wounds in his chest. "It's a lie," Arcu told the echoing voices. "We've all been living a terrible lie." "We know that," they answered. "Murderer! Murderer!" he repeated aloud. A terrible sin for which he would be punished. That word should not be spoken. It was forbidden in the house. Through the whispering gabble of voices, he He heard footsteps approaching. He glanced round. It would soon be candle day. He scurried for cover in the darkness. "I thought so," Innocent muttered to herself. "How could I forget the date? I'm such a fool." She sat on her bed, turning the pages of the almanac with reverence. It was one of the few natural books in the house, a journal that she had endeavoured to work on every day since before the beginning of the dark despair. Just as she daily wound her hair and worked to complete her rendition of the classic texts of the old time, all from memory. The only true edition in the house was stored on data core, and there was no power to read it. She sighed. Her handwritten script had deteriorated badly in the last 100 years or so. There were places where it was an indecipherable scrawl. At other points, the improvised ink, made from the juice of crushed saprophytes, or even once in desperation from her own blood, had faded completely. Yet suddenly she saw the chance of an end. First an omen, and now this discovery. It was nonsense, of course. An end? She wasn't even sure what that meant anymore. No more darkness, no more gruel, no more redarning the darns over the holes in the patches on their ragged clothes. Indefinable nonsense. She turned the pages of the almanac to verify her error. While housekeeper Satralope grew more cantankerous and less approachable than ever, Innocent took it on herself to maintain any order in the house. She tried to keep up a moral stance, even if it was only for cousin Alice's sake. But, despite her best efforts, Alice slid all too easily under the influence of cousin Glospin. What could she do in the circumstances? How could Alice know any better? The wretched creature had never once been away from the house. Glospin was nearly 3 times Alice's age, yet the two of them slunk around the house like new students barely out of brain buffing. It was not the education that Innocent had in mind for her charge. One day she foresaw a battle between herself and Glospin for Alice's soul. This was how she passed her time. It was her burden, the routine that kept her from madness, a task that no other cousin in the house of Lungbarrow had ever dreamt to undertake. She was not prepared to vouch for the sanity of any of them. She had her secrets too, but while the others found their own ways to survive or eventually pass on, she did what she could to ease their passage. She had checked the calculations 3 times with the same result. Full of foreboding, she closed the book and hurried back into the other room. Jobiska was asleep again, her bowl of gruel untouched. Innocent started to put on her cloak and bonnet. Immediately the old lady was awake. "Take me home, dear," she pleaded. "I want to go home." "I have to go out," said Innocent. "You stay here." Jobiska started to whimper, so Innocent took her skinny hand. "Do you know what today is? It's Otherstide Eve. It's 673 years today since it all started." "I'm 3,462, said Jobiska. "6th regeneration. I want to go home." "Never mind. Finish your gruel," Innocent said wearily. She went to look at the contents of the pot. It was empty. "He came back," said Jobiska. Innocent was suddenly flustered. "Who came back?" "Alice came back while you were away. He thought I was asleep, and he ate all the gruel." Much annoyed, Innocent began to buckle her bonnet. "Better not leave me again," said Jobiska hopefully. "Stay here, I won't be long." Innocent fastened her cloak and went out into the house's candle-dark night.